I don't know. Is this working? I can never tell with this new setup at Facebook. It's hard to tell what is going on. Can somebody let me know? Type something in. Give me a comment that you're here. You can hear me. You can see me or something. I'm just okay. I'm just getting set up for today. My producer Steve is out today. He's having he's in a pool tournament, and so he and I will get together tomorrow and do something else. But we're dealing with a great deal of what looks just flat out insane, but it actually isn't. There's actually been a rational history how things have. Thank you, Avi. There's actually been a rational history how things have gone this way. All right, and that's what I would talk about history reset today, because our history did get reset without our knowledge. Now, as you know, in the founding documents of the United States, there are these 10 amendments, and they're all very idealistic about rights and very little about responsibilities, but there's a lot about rights, all right? And some of us realize or have learned that in 1871, a new organic constitution was adopted because the United States of America, as its original government was configured, was bankrupt. So they had to write it. They wrote a new constitution called the Organic Constitution of 1871, which just covers a couple of square miles of Washington, D.C., and all the states are left pretty much to themselves and their own devices. And then starting in 1913, when the banks centralized, that's when power began centralizing around DC, and DC's overreach began to assert itself. All right. So the United States got talked into World War I and World War II by circumstances. All right. And then we got talked into the Korean War, the Vietnam War, okay, and a series of skirmishes. But something that happened in 1947 actually didn't get noticed very much. And I've given you 3 links there, and we'll start with the 1947 link, which is the Magic 12, the government's response to the presence of UFOs in 1954. Okay, that document has been maligned and made fun of, but I think I have about 13 pages of it on that link. And if you read that, you will find that the government took the presence of ETs so seriously that they signed a treaty, not with the Anunnaki, who posed a treaty that would keep weaponry to a minimum and not utilize the atomic weapons that had been developed. But instead, the government adopted the Greada Treaty, which was signed by the Greys. Okay, now the Greys have a very mercantile commercial culture. And in the treaty with the Greys, abductions were allowed and human trafficking, and whatever we could sell, we're allowed to sell. Commerce has no limits and boundaries placed on it as a matter of principle. All right. So then the next step was the Iron Mountain Conference. And in the Iron Mountain Conference, the United States government adopted the ethic of the Greys, which is to say that there's no such thing as good or evil, and that all behavior has to be met behaviorally, and that's all there is to it. It's a very secular point of view, quid pro quo, tit for tat. which is what commerce is based on. If you know anything about maritime admiralty law, commerce is based on quid pro quo. What I do for you, you do for me, back and forth. Okay. And when it gets into fighting and wartime and aggressions and so on, well, that's just business, you know, because the business is cleaning up the mess. That's how it worked. So we began to see our government become more and more and more cynical about its use of power. And there's a member of my family who's in the military, and he went to university as I did. And so we talk about conflict, and we talk about the art of war, and we talk about strategy and tactics and stuff. He's one of the few members of my family that I really can get into discussion with, because the others are all busy. All right, and he points out to me how literal the Iron Mountain Conference ethos has been adopted by the military arm of the US government, so that the military is actually split into factions. There are the factions that are pro Iron Mountain and the factions that are pro 1789 Constitution, and they are not on the same page. And this has a lot to do with the fact that the deep state has different methods and tactics than the current president, who wants to remain law-abiding, who wants to stick with the original 1789 Constitution. All right, so what is true is that our military has two minds. One is Iron Mountain neutrality, and the other is 1789 Constitution. And as it says in Scripture, a divided house cannot stand. And that's why we are looking at so much division. The division is articulated and it shows up as identity politics, because the methods of the 1789 Constitution, the lawful elections, the lawful representation by representatives and senators in Congress, the lawful advocacy for departments for their particular vocation, these departments have been taken over very methodically by the Iron Mountain ethos, which says the way to proceed with having a powerful, invincible country is to be neutral as to methods. And that works hand in glove with the Marxist method, the Fabian School, the Frankfurt School, the Saul Alinsky School of liberalism, the Bolshevik school of overturning what they consider to be archaic and unuseful methods that were in the 1789 Constitution, because they think that their influence ought to be exerted by non-governmental organizations and commerce. And this is why we have high-tech commerce profiteering and using their profits to change and mobilize and influence and thought control the public at large, because practices that were not allowed under the 1789 Constitution are winked at now. And those practices are secrecy. Okay, under secrecy, we have classified documents, need to know, compartmentalization, confidentiality, non-disclosure, so that whole areas of national security are held secret and not accountable for the money they spend, and not accountable for the safety or the usability of the products that they produce, and not accountable for the outcomes that they create with their technology. Let me give you an example of this. NASA, okay. NASA is a corporation that's supposed to be government. However, it is run as a profit-making corporation. In 1986, and I'm not going to talk about Apollo 11 because the Apollo 11 shot was so complicated and intervened at so many levels, and some of them were staged and some of them were not staged. I won't even go there. That's too complicated. But in 1986, the Challenger that blew up didn't lose its crew. The crew are still working in academia. 6 of the 7 of them are still alive. Okay. Then after 2000, after Y2K, NASA sent a spent radioactive engine into the atmosphere of Jupiter. And then in 2009, they sent 2 rocket projectiles into the south pole of the moon. And we have pictures of the damage they did at Crater Cabeus. And then in 2017, NASA sent another radioactive spent engine into the atmosphere at Saturn. So that NASA has not behaved according to the principle of sovereign rights of anybody but themselves. They still think they have the discovery, the right of discovery, and wherever they go, it's theirs. It's like, I'm going to go into the nicest neighborhood in town, and I'm going to walk into somebody's mansion and say, well, I'm here, this is mine now. Well, that's what NASA believes that they have the right to do. Okay, that's an example how corporate ethos have affected the national orientation toward right and wrong. So what we are seeing a lot of all over now is a lot of confusion about what's right and wrong. We have people grabbing onto identity politics, identity political positions, and I'm righter than you, and we're righter than they are, and it's all the I'm righter business, which the Fourth Estate, the national and even international media, support the divide and conquer strategy because it sells newspapers, okay? Because it creates controversy and gets people interested. It has purely a profiteering motive in setting group against group and nation against nation and people against people. It's all about advertising dollars. Since Bernays, who was, into marketing a century ago. All right. So we have a national, international press and media, the television and so forth, that are so focused on getting their ad revenues, they're not paying attention to what is true and what's not true. And a lot of people are getting really confused and angry, of course. Okay. And academia, of course, being sponsored by the Fabian Society, the Milner Kindergarten, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations. Those are the robber barons with nothing but money who want to buy their way into politics. They have financed these think tanks, non-governmental organizations that head trip. They talk about life in the ideal. They don't discuss methods very much, all right? So that the people who follow them are free to use whatever methods they wish, and they do, as we can see in the protests, which are not just peaceful protests by people who want to effect change. The protests we're seeing are a combination of different factors all getting jumbled together. There are the people who are peacefully protesting. There are the insurgents there from non-governmental organizations who are being paid to cause trouble and division and to get people worked up into committing crimes. And then there are the people who are there in order to get themselves something that they don't have to pay for. They're there to loot. They're either there to loot, or they're there to cause trouble, or they're there to peacefully assemble and protest some policy, some practice, some method. But the press jumbles these all together and maximizes the divisions. And that's why we see so much crazy behavior. All right. The harm and the damage that is happening to the innocent is just legion. It's terrible. The false flag COVID-19 epidemic is a dangerous epidemic because what that virus does is disable the immune system of the body that inhabits it, and it adds and includes packets of other diseases, HIV and SARS and so on, so that if you're infected with COVID-19, you may also be infected with HIV and SARS. That was part of the bargain they don't talk about. And since COVID-19 destroys the ability to form immune response, they can't test for an immune response. So they test for what are called exosomes, which are damaged and dead cells. But those damaged and dead cells can be caused by several different factors besides the virus. Okay, dehydration can damage cells in the lungs. Radiation can damage cells in the lungs. High altitude sickness can cause the same thing. So the people who are showing high numbers of exosomes are not necessarily infected by the virus. They may have other reasons for having damaged lung cells. But that's not the way this epidemic is being treated. Okay, the epidemic has its official story and its official, dogma and doctrine and procedure and practice and policy. And that has differed from state to state, done an enormous amount of damage to the economy. But the real damage has been done to the immune systems of countless people all over the world who have been infected with a virus that does not convey immunity when it's over. Now, the hope is that such an immunity will be developed in a vaccine. But the people who advocate vaccines are quick to point out that what they want to add to the vaccine is a chip to make us all an extension of the matrix, an extension of artificial intelligence. A lot of people have a problem with that. All right. So what we're dealing with at home on the ground, where we live, where we sit, is people freaking out and getting triggered. All right. And I'm seeing the change in my neighborhood. Now, I live in an interesting neighborhood. This is a working class neighborhood out in the middle of Central California, not too far from military base. And these apartments were all built in the 70s when the base was built. But who lives here now, okay, are immigrants, principally from Mexico and Central America, from the Mideast, particularly Islamic countries. We have a lot of Sikhs from the Punjab, and we have a lot of Chinese that have been here since the gold rush of the 1800s. we actually have a little Chinatown in the little town next door, which is just really cool. So we have a polyglot sort of community here where people are not really close with their neighbors because, for one thing, we don't all speak the same language, all right? And when things get harsh, when people misbehave, it's easy for people to overreact. There is not much vandalism that occurs here, but there are problems with noise, and there are problems with the population is largely a lot of retired people. The death rate in this little area is 3 times the national average. I looked that up, okay. But local problems are kept to a minimum by the fact that we're all spread out and we're easy to surveil. I had a neighbor once who was screaming and yelling at her children, her little tiny children. And so I called her out on it. I said, you know, you really shouldn't scream at your children like that. That the children don't forgive that sort of thing when they get older. And she was furious with me for calling her out. But you know something? It never happened again. Okay, so here we're in a place where if somebody does something that's inappropriate and a neighbor says something, it might work out. But what we see nationwide is the use of very bad, harmful, and destructive methods. Now, I've put up graphics about these methods that have been in use by the leftists, the liberals, the Marxists, you know how I'm talking about. I keep putting up their own stuff that describes their own methods. And their own methods, if you've read the methods of Marx, the methods of the Frankfurt School, and Saul Alinsky, it's all about destroying the orderly processes that we already have instead of employing those orderly processes to actually solve problems for people. All right. And so the left has kind of gone over the edge, around the bend. Their methods are consistently disruptive and difficult to deal with. They do not like to be confronted. They do not like to be told no. And due to the Commie Core curriculum that was financed and put in place by the same Bill Gates who pushes vaccines and GMOs, we have a generation of young people who, as a matter of schooling, are insubordinate and apathetic and unconcerned about the ethos of the original founders of this country. They have bought into the simple commercialism of the 1871 Constitution and the Iron Mountain Conference, okay, and the New World Order, I call it. All right. So we who are older are having to confront a generation that doesn't want to listen to anything we have to say. That's the Commie Core thesis that the children get taught, that the older generations, they don't have any wisdom, they don't know anything, everything that's wrong is their fault, and we don't have to listen to them. All right. Looks to me as if we are in a situation that's described by the book of Revelation in the Hebrew scriptures that's called an apocalypse. And since the ethos that we, the people, are acting out and reacting to is an ET method of governance, namely the Grays and the Greada Treaty and the Iron Mountain Conference, we are dealing with a problem that is over our heads in terms of law, because the rational step-by-step behavioral causes and effects in common law have been completely overturned and replaced with commercial statutes that are rule-based and that can change in a moment and go this way or that way, and each state can be different and have, like, okay, in one state, a woman was arrested for opening up her beauty shop, and a barber, a 77-year-old barber, was arrested, and he lost his business license. I mean, you just see the most ridiculous rules, because it's a rule-baiting society. That's what commercialism does and is, okay? It's a society where you can be penalized if somebody doesn't like you, if they turn you in and report you as something just because they said so, and because the rules say if somebody complains, that the complaint has to be taken seriously. There are no rights here anymore. No rights. They don't exist. There's no right to speak. There's no right to assemble. Doesn't matter what the reason is, okay? And so we, the older generation, has some serious thinking to do, since most of this problem is over our heads. And I find that what I have to do in order to cope with the damage and the harm and the insolence and the insubordination and the sheer madness of it is withdraw. And withdrawing, as William Mount points out, when you withdraw, you are limited to your own resources. When you withdraw, you are limited to the people who trust you. When you withdraw, you have to be perceived by everybody around you as being harmless, that you won't bother anybody or rattle anybody's chains or jangle their cage, because in a rule-baiting system, all that has to happen is that somebody, right or wrong, complains about you, and then you're in real trouble. Look what happened in the Soviet Union, and look what happens in China. Look what happens in China. I have published a part of a copy of a Chinese book on ethics, the Zhuang Falang, and it's just an introduction to that particular ethos and ideology. And it's just as attuned to Pilgrim's Progress and perfecting one's character as the Sermon on the Mount in Christianity, and as the Benedictine order, and as, I'd say, some Sikhs and the Baha'i. There are still identity groups in our world that treasure and prosper and hold devotions to perfecting the individual's character according to a spiritual ideal. There are still a few places where those values are held sacred and acted out. Now, ordinarily, I give you a list of where that is, but what I find is, as a person who tends to speak bluntly and frankly about what's true, what I find is that there are people now so angry that they are automatically attacking anyone who dares to try to speak the truth. So you have to be careful to whom you speak the truth, because the truth disrupts what is harmful. The truth disrupts what is dishonest. And that makes people angry, and they can get you in trouble. All right, I'm going to look at some of these comments now. All right, here we go. We've got Derek Michael Bothwell. Whoa. Let me make this a little bigger. Ah. All right. More terrible Romans. I'm sorry I can't deal with a long dissertation on my vision isn't that good. Okay. Caligula's speech to his troops. Okay, we just have a few comments. And they look as if they're intended for me to look further into them, and that's fine. I appreciate that because that's how I keep learning. I keep learning. One of the beliefs that are held by the commercialist entrepreneurs is that people reach a level of awareness and then they stay there in an identity that they retain forever. And what I've noticed is that over the decades, my sense of identity politics has changed just about every 7 years. Okay. When I was in my teens, I was a this. And then when I was in my 20s, I was a that. And when I was in my 30s, I changed and joined and became one of those. And in my 40s, I dropped out of everything. And in my 50s, you see, identity politics is all temporary. And we learn that people's thoughts are just always in the process of flux. They're always in the process of discovering a new truth. And the new truth can change a whole bunch of the old truths. And then, whoops, we're in a new place. That's the delightful part of existence and incarnation that I get a giggle about, that I enjoy despite all of the conflict. And when conflict rears its head, the other thing I get out of it is that there's a lesson in it for me that I need to learn how to confront, address, and resolve this conflict. And that's why I adhere to and advocate conflict and dispute resolution, mediation, arbitration, and conciliation as methods that serve the positive purpose of fixing the problems and not merely protesting and objecting and disrupting and creating uproar and triggering people over those problems. It's time we get rational about fixing them. I noticed there was a tweet in Twitter today where the United Nations is saying, well, things are so bad for us now, we can't get involved in any of the European stuff anymore. We're going to have to learn how to mediate our own conflicts. I thought, good going, good going. That's a good realization to come to. Oh my goodness. Well, I think I've talked at you long enough for Saturday. And I hope what I've said makes some sense to you. And I hope you'll write to me and give me your thoughts on what I'm saying and give me your examples of how it works out for you. Because I'm hoping here at Facebook, I've been here 11 years, and there are a couple dozen of you who we exchange stuff all the time. And that's the part of Facebook that I treasure, that I do have friends here. In fact, I have more friends at Facebook than I do in the neighborhood. Well, the neighborhood don't speak English very well. Okay, so we'll keep struggling together. And I'm doing a video just about every day now. And this one will be up on YouTube a little while later. So if you want a short link for it, you'll have one. And hi there, how are you, Beverly? I'm just about to wind it up. But the whole podcast will be here. It's just half an hour today because Steve is off at a pool tournament. That's what it is. And Beverly, do you have a question for me? Otherwise, I'm just going to end the live part and move on to some other places I have to show up today. There's a lot of work to do because fixing problems is not a method that is popular right now. Everybody is talking about and acting out from protesting, objecting, and creating triggering. And that's not how I solve any problems. So I've got to move on and advocate problem solving wherever I go. I guess that's the function of being an old lady. I don't mind being an old lady. It's a lot better than the alternative. I'll tell you that. And, you know, this year is my 60th high school reunion. And so many of those people I graduated with aren't even here anymore. And how did that happen? And where did the time go? I'm just amazed. I'm still kicking. So thanks for coming by, and we'll see you guys when we see you. Probably next Saturday at least, but in the meantime, you know where I am on YouTube. See you. Bye-bye.